Okay, this video is on John Mackie, the subjectivity of values. There's Mackie. This excerpt is from his 1977 book, Ethics, Inventing Right and Wrong. The title probably clues you into the fact that he's an anti-realist. He doesn't think that ethics are objective. He thinks that we invent moral facts. They're subjective. We invent what's right and wrong. So he's on the anti-realist team. His particular version of anti-realism is known as the error theory. Why is it called that? Well, his thesis is this: there are no objective values, no objective moral facts. When people make moral claims, however, they are claiming that there are objective moral facts. And that means that all moral claims are false. They are errors. That's why Mackie calls his view an error theory. And he also gives us an explanation of why he thinks people make these erroneous moral claims. Mackie's view is also a version of moral skepticism. That is, a skeptic denies that we have knowledge of something, and Mackie denies that we have knowledge of objective moral facts, because of course there's nothing there to know. All right, now Mackie's got basically three main arguments in support of his anti-realism. Oh, back up a little bit. Mackie, by the way, was a great Hume scholar, and so he thought of his philosophy in many ways as an updated version of David Hume. So you'll see similarities there, common sympathies. The first major argument he makes for anti-realism, he calls the argument from relativity. I'm not sure how helpful that title is, but here's what he means. He asks this question: why do people and cultures have different moral beliefs? Because look, it's obvious that they do, right? I mean, some cultures think that monogamy is the right way to go. Others think that polygamy is the right way to go. Some cultures I've heard of, well, yeah, you have a lot of examples. Some cultures have different standards of what counts as modesty. We could multiply examples. You can go talk to the anthropologist if you want more examples. But beyond even just cultures, you can take this to the individual level. When y'all are sitting in class together, you probably have different moral beliefs on many topics than the person sitting right next to you. People have different views about the morality of all kinds of things, of their duties to one another, their duties towards the poor, certainly their sexual ethics, lots of things. No two of us might have identical set of moral beliefs. Even different moral beliefs about when it is right to kill, in terms of, is it right to kill in war or as a criminal punishment or in self-defense, or many different things here. Okay. Now, his question is, why do people and cultures have different moral beliefs? What's the best explanation for that? He says there's two possible explanations here. Maybe you've got more options, but he thinks there's two possibilities. One possibility is that, you know what, we're all confronted with lots of moral evidence, and people simply draw different conclusions from the evidence. Like in science, sometimes scientists draw different conclusions from the evidence and defend different theories of the world, until, often science eventually achieves consensus about the evidence. One theory accounts better than another for the evidence. That's one possibility. Another possibility, though, is that people are not forming their moral beliefs as conclusions from evidence at all. Instead, people are just projecting their own ways of life. In other words, people have moral beliefs that they do because they adhere to and participate in different ways of life. They don't live the way they do because of the moral beliefs that they have. No. It goes to directions. They have the moral beliefs that they do because of the way of life that they've already adopted. The belief isn't based on evidence. It's brought about by simply the psychological and sociological factors. All right. Now, Mackie thinks explanation B is clearly the best explanation. He says, look, if you round at the world, people's moral beliefs always track with their ways of life. The monogamous cultures are the ones, people who believe in monogamy are people who participate in monogamous ways of life, even if they're not as monogamous as they think that they ought to be, or as their culture. They still basically have that as an ideal, because that's the way of life and culture that they participate in. People are not drawing conclusions from evidence. If you just look at that, this is why morality tracks with upbringing. It's not based on evidence, it's based on sociology. Okay, but that doesn't bode well for your knowledge of, for the truth of your moral beliefs. If you're just projecting your way of life and they're not derived from evidence, well, that doesn't give us any reason whatsoever to think that your moral beliefs are true, right? It doesn't. So here's the argument. Cultures hold varying moral beliefs. The best explanation for these variations is that they reflect varying ways of life rather than the perception of objective values. Therefore, probably our moral beliefs are caused by our ways of life, not by perception of objective values. So if you want to fight with this argument, you might with either of the premises. And in fact, people do. So here's one objection to the argument. This is an objection to premise one. Premise one said, hey, people and cultures hold widely different beliefs. But the objection might say, whoa. I mean, yeah, okay, there's difference. But people individually, and even cultures as a whole, agree on a lot of broad moral principles. Probably everybody in the class thinks that, you know, it's wrong to murder innocent people just for your personal satisfaction and pleasure. And actually, that's probably a widely held value worldwide. And not just murder, we can go beyond that to lots of things. Yeah, people may differ on details on specific issues, but broad moral principles, no, there's not disagreement. In fact, you might take this further and say the moral differences that there are usually due to a different application of these broadly held principles under different circumstances. So, for example, let's see. I'm going to invent an example. I'm not sure how much this tracks reality. Some cultures have practiced infanticide. That's when, you know, you have a child, it is morally permissible to leave them out to die as infants. Now, you might think, whoa, well, that's way different than our culture, okay? But the person here might say, wait a minute, both cultures actually might value life, but they are applying that principle in two different ways. The culture that practices infanticide might also be trying to preserve life, but there are scarce resources, and this is the way that they can best preserve life under a situation of scarce resources, and that is eliminate excessive offspring. That stories like that could provide the explanation for why there appear to be these big differences when really those differences are just implications of a shared principle. Okay, so that's a possible objection. That's a possible objection which Mackie anticipates and knows that people make. And here's what he says back. He says, look, even if I grant that, on this view, your specific moral judgments are objectively true, but only kind of by accident, only contingently, not necessarily, right? In that case, okay, it happens to be wrong in your culture to practice infanticide, but it very well could have been right under different conditions. That's weird. I guess that's a kind of objective morality, but it seems like you're still significantly weakening your moral realism by saying that it just happens to be the case that this is wrong in our culture. It could have gone differently in different circumstances. Secondly, he wants to say, look, this whole idea that people are applying broad moral principles in order to make specific moral judgments is not true. When people form beliefs about, say, infanticide, they're not going through some reasoning process and saying, how can I maximize the preservation of life? They're not doing that at all. They just make gut instinct, intuitive responses. They just go with whatever they've been raised to believe, basically. They're not reasoning about their moral choices at all. People don't usually. They just have these senses that infanticide is wrong or infanticide is right. They're not thinking about any big principle. So the reply really doesn't explain the vast majority of our moral judgments that are divergent from one another. All right. Let's move on now to his second argument. The second argument, well, he says there's just a second argument, the argument from queerness. But the argument from queerness, and think here, he means like weirdness. You know, he's a British, older use of the term. Doesn't have anything to do with gender or sexuality issues. The argument from queerness has two parts, one epistemic and one metaphysical. These are really two distinct arguments. So this is his second argument here. Here's how it goes. If there were objective values, then we would have to have a really weird way, a queer way of knowing about them. And that would be a faculty of moral intuition. Let me explain that for a second. Mackie agrees with Hume that you can't see moral facts. There's no good arguments for moral facts. How could you possibly know about them? The only way you have left is to say just through intuition. Now, what do I mean by intuition? I mean a really strong gut instinct that, burning cats is wrong for no good reason, or killing innocent people is wrong. It's a gut instinct. He said that would be the only path you have to knowing objective moral values. But he says, we don't have a reliable faculty of intuition. Your gut means nothing to me. That's just not a good basis for believing anything. And that means our last path is cut off. We have no way of knowing objective moral values. All right, what are the possible responses here? Well, you could deny premise 2. What did premise 2 say? Premise 2 said we don't have a reliable faculty of intuition. Somebody might very well come back and say, many people have come back and said, and people do, and we're going to read them. Say, wait a minute, we do have a reliable faculty of intuition. Your gut instincts are trustworthy, at least under the right circumstances. And here's one reason somebody might say this. The only way we even know about math and numbers and so many essential concepts that we have is through intuition, not through a non-circular argument, not through direct physical perception. We need intuition. Here's how this argument might go. If we can have any knowledge or concepts even of things like essence, number, identity, diversity, solidity, inertia, and things like this, then we must have a reliable faculty of intuition. Pause. You might not even be clear what we mean by the concept of essence, of identity, of diversity, or why someone may think that we would have to know this through intuition. Those are kind of philosophers' arguments. Just think about numbers for a second. You can't see numbers, right? You can't prove that 3 exists. I mean, you can use 3 to prove other stuff, like 3 plus 3 is 6, but you can't prove that there is 3. You can't see it. There's no good argument for it. So what premise 1 is saying is the only way you could know that the number 3 exists is through a faculty of intuition. If we don't have a reliable faculty of intuition, we don't even know that numbers exist. But look, we do know that these things exist. I know that numbers exist. Therefore, we must have a reliable faculty of intuition. Okay. That's one possible objection. Mackie knows that people are going to say that. Here's what he wants to say. Whoa. Premise 1 there is false. You don't need intuition to know about numbers. We can acquire knowledge of all these things through empirical observation, our 5 senses, without relying on intuition. And whatever we can't discover that way, we should just chuck it out. Now, he doesn't tell us how we're going to come up with numbers without intuition. He just says, I can't go into it now. Just trust me. We don't need intuition for anything that's worth having. This brings us to his third argument, the argument from queerness, the metaphysical part 2. This one I think is the toughest to track with, so be patient. Here's how it goes. If there were objective values, they would be super weird things, very strange entities. An entity is a thing. But super weird things probably don't exist. Therefore, objective values probably don't exist. Okay, let me unpack it a little bit. Why believe premise one? Why would we think that if there were objective values, they would be really strange things? What's strange about them? Well, if they were, here's the first thing. If they were objectively good things, then anyone who knew about these things would know that they ought to pursue them. They would be motivated to pursue them. But nothing that we know of works this way. This is a version of Hume's motivation argument. The point of Hume's motivation argument, the stuff that Hume was saying was like, look, a belief alone never motivates you. You have to have a belief plus a desire. But and Mackie is saying the same thing, basically. There's no belief you could have about anything that will motivate you to pursue it, apart from you also having a desire to pursue it. Nothing works that way. Nothing we know of. So if there were objective values, they would be different than anything else we can even conceive of. Because that's what they would have to do. There's another way, however, if you missed, I think that's the hardest point. Here's an easier point, a way to get what's weird about objective values, according to Mackie. We have no idea how moral properties like wrongness could be related to natural properties like pain or deliberate cruelty, right? We can understand what it is to be in pain. We understand what it is to be deliberately cruel, but we don't know how wrongness is somehow generated by pain or deliberate cruelty. How does that work? Look, this is really an updated version of Hume's point that, look, you can't see, touch, taste, or feel badness. Yeah, and you don't even know how, or like Harmon's point, that like we don't even know how things like badness could even be causally related to physical events in the world that we understand, natural properties. So moral properties are just super weird and therefore probably don't exist. Now, why do we have all these erroneous, false moral beliefs? Well, Mackie has an explanation for us. It's not because they're true. He says, here's how the psychology and the sociology of it goes. There's patterns of objectification. When we think that we are perceiving or recognizing some objective moral acts, we're actually just projecting our own moral attitudes. Like, I don't like stealing, and so like I just say, therefore stealing must be objectively bad because I don't like it. I'm just kind of projecting it onto the world, which is not a reliable way to form beliefs about the world, just to project your feelings about it. And then we also internalize socially established patterns of behavior. Everybody around you kind of like sets up their society to disapprove of abject cruelty to cats. Well, you're going to internalize that and think, well, it's because it is wrong objectively. We confuse the fact, in other words, that we or other people desire something with the mistaken notion that that thing is intrinsically desirable or objectively good. But those are two totally different things. So he thinks this is a far better explanation of why we have moral beliefs, and it shows that our moral beliefs are not caused by any reliable process of data gathering whatsoever. That's Mackie.